For one thing, the whole of the gospel is a Jewish story. And when the word Jew is used, it is not to differentiate Jews from Gentiles. Gentiles, by the way, are barely mentioned in the Gospels. So the term Jew was to differentiate a group of Jews, as we understand the term today, with another group of Jews. In fact, there were two main groups of Jews in those days. Those who lived in the north, the Galileans, and those who lived in the south, the Judeans. This is what the word Jew is translated in the Greek. The Judeans, the southern people of Israel, if you want. In the same sense that today you have the Sephardims, right? Jews from the Arabic and Spanish countries, and the Ashkenazis, Jews from European countries. But the word Jew in John does not, in fact, point to a special, it does, by the way, point to a very special group, which is the religious leaders. If you want to see John 5:16, I'll read it for you. It says, for this reason, the Jews, John 5:16. For these reasons, the Jews persecuted Jesus and sought to kill him because he had done these things on the Shabbat. How many times did I hear this phrase? Not only, by the way, from Christians who did not like Jews, but some Jews themselves who accused the New Testament of being actually anti-Semitic. Who are these Jews, by the way, in John 5:16? All the Jews? Were not the disciples Jewish themselves? The Jews here are the religious leaders. And so it is in this slide that we ought to read the word as we proceed in the gospel. If there's a book that is pro-Semite, it is, well, the Gospel of John. And what it is hostile towards those religious leaders who mislead Israel, it is profoundly pro-Semitic because God profoundly loves his chosen people, Israel. Now we're about to see something great, something that sets a precedence for us. Notice that every disciples that came to believe in this portion of the scriptures did so through the testimony of others. Let's see how this happened. First we see in verse 37, John 1:37. The first disciples, the two disciples, it says, heard him speak and they followed Jesus. So by the testimony of John the Baptist, these believers came and followed Yeshua. By the way, who were these two? We know, by the way, only one of them. It's Andrew. And the others we do not know. And it could very well be John the Apostle, John the writer himself. I don't know if you noticed, but here in the Gospel, John the Baptist is never called the Baptist, but only John. In the other Gospel, he's almost always identified as John the Baptist. Why is that? For the simple reason that John the Apostle never mentions himself in the Gospel. So that we never have to mistake him with the other John. That, by the way, is true humility. And so he could very well be that other disciple. So what was that first thing that Andrew did when he learned about Yeshua? Verse 41, he went to see his family. And so he went to speak to his brother Simon, who happened to be Peter, and he led him to Yeshua. According to the Greek, that is the first thing he did. Verse 41, he first found his brother. As soon as he saw Jesus, he went to get his brother, and he told him. Then what happened? After that, Andrew went to get his brother Peter, then he went to get his friend Philip. He starts with his family, then he goes to his friends. Reading the translation of John 1:43, it seems that Jesus actually found Philip. It says like this, the following day, Jesus wanted to go to Galilee and found Philip and said to him, follow me. But the original, the name Jesus does not appear. And so it would flow if we understand that it is always Andrew himself that does the evangelism. And so Andrew brought Philip to Yeshua. And next Philip went, and who did he tell? Nathanael. And he also brought him to Yeshua. See how the gospel started to spread. So we see that everyone who gets saved at the beginning is through the testimony of others. Does that put a little pressure on you? I hope it does. Because we ought to share what we know. This is why we are still here. And remember Matthew. Do you remember what Matthew did when he first recognized Jesus? In Matthew 9, In verse 9 it says, as Jesus passed on from here, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax office. And he said to him, follow me. So he arose and followed him. And in the next verse we see Jesus eating with tax collectors. But the question is, why were these tax collectors were doing this so suddenly? It's because Matthew was a tax collector and he made a party and he called all his friends and he says, I want you to meet Yeshua. This is beautiful, isn't it? I believe we're given here timeless hints for evangelism. Of course, we don't force, we present. And in the last verse of chapter 1, verse 51, we see important words here that concern our position in Yeshua and our walk in Him. See what Yeshua says here to Nathanael, who I believe, right here in verse 51, stands for all believers. And he said to him, verse 51, most assuredly I say to you, hereafter you shall see heaven open, and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. Why did he at that time, right at the end of this account, say that? First, we notice that the words most assuredly in the original is amen, said twice. So what Yeshua was saying, amen, amen. I say to you, hereafter you shall see heaven open. I love to see the Messiah's excitement in this verse towards the new believer. Amen, amen, you are here. I'm going to show you some great things. And here he speaks of himself as the Son of Man. This, by the way, is in reference to Daniel 7:13, where we read, I was watching in the night vision, and behold, one like the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven. This was a known title for the Messiah, the one that, by the way, brought the high priest in Mark 14 to tear out his clothes when Jesus told him, I am the Son of Man, and that he led them to be crucified. And it is here that Yeshua makes a reference to a dream that Jacob made in Genesis 28, 10 to 22, where he dreamed of a ladder, and here Jesus identifies himself as the ladder. Let's go to that passage, Genesis 28, that will help us to understand what Yeshua meant when he closes that passage of 1 John, that passage that speaks of his nature. He closes it with that image. In verse 10 of Genesis 28, we read, Now Jacob went out from Beersheba and went toward Haran. And he came to a certain place and stayed there all night, because the sun has set. And he took one of the stones of that place and put it at his head. And he laid down in that place to sleep. Then he dreamed, and behold, the ladder was set up on the earth, and its top reached to heaven. And there the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. So first Jacob comes, we see, to a certain place. Actually, the Hebrew says to the place. It was a place that was known to Jacob. So it seems that he purposely went there. This place must be important because the word place is used 6 times in this story. We do not know, by the way, what this place is. However, what is interesting is that Jacob later calls this place Bethel. And even in Genesis 28:17, he calls it the gate of heaven. It was a place of prayer for him. We each, by the way, have our Bethel. We each have our place to heaven. You know, when you sit down and you close the door of your room and you pray to God, this is your Bethel. This place is also called Luz in Genesis 28:19. No one knows what it is. Luz means, by the way, almond tree. It's always interesting, by the way, to go see what the rabbis comment on a certain passage. One of them had an interesting comment on this. He says, as the nut has no mouth opening, so no man could discover the entrance of this town. This is a nice imagery. And it is there that Jacob dreamed the ladder. What did the ladder represent to Jacob? What did he understand? In the dream, the ladder represents that link between heaven and earth. He said the ladder was set up on earth and its top reached heaven. And it is in John 1:51 that we fully understand this ladder as it represents the Messiah, that link between heaven and earth. That word, that what made flesh, actually had become that link. But this is not all. He goes even further. And the story here also links Jacob to the disciples of Jesus. What is their relation?